getting the enjoyment out of being competent and being able to complete the tasks.
Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. I am here today with Aaron Gelfand. Aaron is a recent LabVIEW Champion as of a few months ago, so congratulations, Aaron.
Thank you, Sam.
Welcome to the club. I'm kind of curious, actually, to hear your opinion on what it's like to actually be a champion now. Does it live up to all your expectations?
Actually, in a couple of ways, yes. So there have been champions for a decade or so now. And I always thought it was invite only. I didn't realize that you applied for it. So I don't know how long ago I could have potentially been a champion for, because I also ended up missing. I had applied almost 2 years ago, and I was like 3 days late. I had just missed the previous application when they cut off and start choosing, and I was like 3 days late, the next week, and so I had to wait an entire year on that. But I'm enjoying being a champion so far. I definitely like having the champions do get escalated support access, so that is something that has been very beneficial to me.
Yeah, I would say like that's one of the big perks. The other one is just kind of the champions meetings and having like inside people to talk to at NI about various things and escalate things, and also just kind of having an idea of what the roadmap is. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, people build it up to be this great big thing in their head, and I don't know. Not to burst anybody's bubble, but like it's good, but it's I don't know. If you put it on a pedestal, it's a little bit of a letdown. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I it's an interesting concept, or because part of the LabVIEW Champion application process and how you get approved or denied to become a champion is, are you giving back to the community? It's not, oh, do you know everything about LabVIEW? It's, are you out there? Are you helping people? Are you making the LabVIEW community a better place in some way, shape, or form? And so I do think that's a more interesting aspect of it versus just like the certification process. Um,
yeah,
because you
yeah.
need the mentors, you need the people that help others, that make the environment a better place.
Yeah, people think you need to be this like super LabVIEW programmer, and that's not necessarily true. That certainly helps, but it's not really what you get judged on. It's more like you said, it's all the things that you do to help out in the community. Um, yeah, I highly encourage anybody who is doing stuff in the community and active and visible to apply. As Aaron mentioned, the visibility part is kind of important because it is in some ways a little bit of a popularity contest in that people have to recognize your name. So, if you're doing things, just make sure that you let people like me and Aaron and any of the other champions know so that when your name comes up, they're like, oh, yeah, I've heard of that guy, that person. I know what they've done, and they'll vote for you. Um, yeah. Let's see. What else is there to talk about? NI Connect is coming up. I've got my NI Connect shirt on. Um,
Yep.
yeah, there's a
Uh,
whole lot going on at NI Connect this year. Sorry, I cut you off.
yeah, it's going to be quite interesting because it's the first time NI Connect is not in Austin. It's up in Fort Worth, which is going to be interesting for logistics on, I think, on NI/Emerson's side, because they're so used to, oh, if I need to go get some hardware, or at the expert bar if there's someone that they need for a specific set of knowledge, it's like, hey, can you come down this afternoon or can you come down tomorrow? Because depending upon where you live in Austin, the convention center is half an hour, maybe an hour away. Not, oh, hey, we're 200 miles away from here. And so I think this year with them doing it in Fort Worth, it's going to be a little bit interesting on seeing how that plays into how the event as a whole works out. One of the differences they are doing this year is they invited a number of LabVIEW consultants to help man the what used to be called the R&D expert booth. I think it's just called the experts booth this year. It's something I had manned 2 decades ago when I was at NI, of being a recognized expert on specific topics. And this year, for the first time, they're bringing in non-NI people to help answer those questions. And I believe you were invited to that as well, if I recall.
Yeah, I think it's me, you, Alan, Casey, Katya. There might be a few others in there that I'm missing. I think that's
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
So
I actually
I think that's something that will be interesting this year.
yeah, last year I got pulled into that only because somebody had asked them a DQMH question. There were no, and they didn't have anybody there that knew DQMH, and Eric saw me walking by and grabbed me and pulled me into it. So that worked pretty well.
There
So
you
yeah,
go.
yeah. I mean, I think it's good. NI has certain knowledge, and that's good. And they have like the inside track. They know what's going on with the products and everything. But I think there's another set of knowledge of like the practical, like in use knowledge of like the projects that we do. And I don't think often NI has that.
And I did not used to have that. If you go back more than a decade ago, I would say, and I definitely did not have that. But like a decade ago, there was a project that NI brought in a lot of partners for a very large project, and NI saw and I had some of their people working on it, plus a bunch of partners who were both certified LabVIEW developers, certified LabVIEW architects, and I really started having to use their own products, and it was a nice learning experience for them.
Yeah, well now they do a little bit more on the system integration side for some of their larger customers. They're actually sending people out on site building stuff, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, NI now has NI used to solely be the products; they weren't the solutions, and now NI has a number of those vertically integrated solutions that came about because of that project and a couple of others around the same time. That I think NI has, it's what's the colloquialism, eating your own food or what have you.
Yeah.
And so I think NI learned a lot from those projects as they really started using their own products as solutions rather than as products.
Yeah, I think sometimes like the best products are ones that you use yourself that solve a problem that you have. Particularly, we were
Yeah,
talking before we started recording about having internal toolkits and stuff, and then releasing them. And I think those make the best. If you set out, I'm going to make a reusable tool and I'm just going to build something because I think it's what people want. Yeah, that might work out, but it'll work out much better if you're like, I have this specific problem. I'm building a tool that solves it for me. Maybe it's worth sharing that with other people. I think that's a much better way to go about that.
yeah, because you have specific problems you're trying to solve, and sometimes you say, "Oh, that problem applies to everybody," and no, it doesn't. And other times you're like, "Hey, this problem really does apply to a bunch of people," and sure enough, it does. And so if it's something that you're using, I think it is generally going to be more accurate and relevant than if you're imagining what other people are going through without going through it yourself.
Yeah, well, it's also easier to justify working on those things because you're actually using it on a project as opposed to, oh, it's this thing I think people want, and then you're trying to chase that down. Oh.
Yes.
So yeah, at the end of the day, if it's something you're using, even if nobody else decides to use it, hey, you still got a useful tool for you out of it. So
Yes, and especially if you're able to use it across multiple projects. The one you and I were talking about a little bit earlier has been submitted as a possible topic for the GLA summit later this year. I'm still waiting to hear back on whether it'll be accepted or not. But it came out of the concept that I've had with multiple projects of I need a way of storing data. And you look at a lot of different projects, and you might have a data storage for this type of data, data storage for that type of data, different data storage for this. And you have all these modules that are storing data that you can easily start cross-coupling your modules because, I have an interlock that if I'm supposed to if I'm supposed to turn on a digital signal to allow me to open a particular valve, well, before I'm allowed to do that, I need to know the pressure on both sides of the valve door. I need to know the temperature on one side of the valve door. I need to know certain other conditions in the system. And if you have one software submodule that's giving you pressure information, another software submodule that's giving you temperature information, another software submodule that's giving you are my motors in motion, you can end up unintentionally with a huge amount of cross coupling between your modules, which makes debugging harder, it makes maintenance harder. And so one problem I've been trying to solve for myself for a long time is there a way to sort of create what I ended up calling the data librarian, which is basically a library that is my source of truth for what is the current state of the system from a data perspective? That all the modules can look at the librarian, they don't have to look at each other, so I can avoid a lot of the unintentional cross-coupling that I see in other people's code, and unfortunately sometimes creeps into my own code. And so I created, as I said, a reuse library that I've now been reusing for probably about 4 to 5 years called the Data Librarian. It's great with scale. It's great. It's designed around scalar data. It's not going to work for things like waveforms, RF. When you're getting into the arrays worth of data, but it's great for scalar data, which has been a lot of my projects for certain customers over the last couple of years.
Yeah, Steve Watts would be very happy to hear you mention coupling. That is definitely an issue that he talks about a lot. And I think it's one of
Oh
the
yeah.
ones that creeps in and causes lots of problems. And it's kind of insidious because you don't always necessarily realize it immediately that you have problems with it until it starts causing problems. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And by the time it's causing problems, it's usually harder to decouple and debug without breaking things in multiple places at once.
Yeah, the one feature I liked about your data librarian, which was really cool, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, was the ability to record data and then play it back. I think that's a huge.
Yeah, so one of the features of the data librarian is all of the data is accessed by tags. So basically, I have a string name representing the current value of any data item. And so I might have, like for my current project, there's 5 locations within this machine. One location is called FEL1, second location is called FEL2, third location is called shuttle, fourth location is called outgas, and the fifth location is called manipulator. And so from a lookup perspective, I can look up manipulator.temperature, outgas.temperature, FEL1.temperature, and any module that needs to know about that temperature can look it up by name. Well, what that also allows me to do is that allows me to pause my temperature acquisition module, and because everything is accessed by name, I can then start a readback where instead of getting the live data, because I know the name, I can start playing data out of a log file that, as long as it's got the name, the relative timestamp, and I don't even need the relative timestamp if I'm willing to just say next line, next line, next line, and value. And so with this project, I'm going to be able to record my customer systems because we're data logging, and to help with troubleshooting of, why does the simulator behave differently, and why do my unit tests behave differently than the real world system appears to be behaving. I'm actually going to be able to play back live data from a real system through the software, when in a sort of simulated mode, and I can actually do mixed items where I only put certain items to sleep, so to speak. I can stop my temperature, or I can stop my pressures, or I can stop certain information, and start playing the recorded data to see how the system reacts to this live data, and why did the customer see the behavior that they actually saw.
So are you able to use that then as like part of like automated testing as well, or are you just manually doing that at the moment?
It's manual at the moment. I'm in the process of turning it into automated testing. One thing that I do have right now, for the system that I'm working on that has this, is the system is based off of a Serio 9045, which is an 8-slot compact Rio chassis. And we have several serial modules. We have several digital input modules, several digital output modules. And what I have is I have them all hooked up to an older Serio 9066 that I happen to have, which is an older 8-slot chassis. And so all of the serial cables cross connect. I have simulators for all of the serial controlled devices. All of the digital inputs off of my customer's 9045 go to digital outputs on my simulator, and all of the digital inputs go to digital outputs. And so I'll be able to play it back inside software, but I'm also able to play it back on the simulator, so that in case there's weird timing issues inside the software race conditions, I'll be able to play it back off of either the physical hardware simulator or internally. So maybe I'll run across a race condition that I don't see when I'm debugging, that I only see with live hardware. And with this librarian being on both the physical hardware simulator and inside the actual device, I have the ability to try and replicate problems in either way, or at least I will as the project progresses.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, that sounds quite
Now,
powerful. Oh,
a different reuse library that's being used on this same project is a graphical interface reuse library that I've used on a couple of projects. And that is going to be shown off at GDevCon NA in July this summer. And I will be bringing the hardware simulator, as well as my customer's hardware, or at least the control portion, to show that off as part of the demo. So I built it into a travel 19-inch rack, so I think that'll be fun for people to see.
very cool. This is the picture control stuff that you showed at one of the mastermind groups.
Yes, this is the picture control toolkit that I showed off at one of the LabVIEW masterminds. I'm doing a 25-minute presentation on it at GDevCon NA in July. And I'm going to be showing off a GUI that has a radically different number of controls than users will think it has. I'm not going to give away the answer, but because I'm going to be asking that during the presentation, is how many controls and indicators do you think are on the software that I'm displaying? And very few people are going to get the correct answer.
Yeah, I had a conversation. I think your name came up recently with one of my clients that are looking at doing some stuff with some picture controls, and I mentioned your thing, so I might have to send them your way. But I I have a question because I remember somewhere picture controls are really just strings under the hood, correct?
Yes.
How do you get access to that string? Because I was trying to show that to them, and I was like, I don't know actually how you get access to the string.
So in my toolkit, which I designed the specs for and did some of the coding, but mostly used a subcontractor. We don't actually, even though I know, like in some of the forums where people are manipulating that picture via the strings, we don't actually do that. We are for this toolkit, we're doing everything using the NI interfaces for
Hmm.
2D picture controls, and we're not actually playing with the raw string information under the hood. There wasn't a need for it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because I was like trying to explain that to them, but then they're like, "Great, how do I access it?" And I couldn't figure out how to do it. So
And
probably
and
something
I
easy.
have NI has a number of VIs that have been around forever that allow you to do it. There was a recent forum posting that I have been reading, and I think you're talking about that exact same one, where there's certain newer information in this specification that NI hasn't implemented and someone else was doing, because you can manipulate the string directly. But we did not. I did not need to do that for this particular project.
Yeah, I think that was Norm talking about that, if I remember correctly.
It may have been. I can go hunting for it, but I don't know if
Yeah. No, that's
it's
not really worth it.
worthwhile at the moment.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to touch on is the toolkits that you mentioned. I have seen before because you presented on them at our LabVIEW Mastermind group, and you've been a part of that
Yes,
for a while now, maybe
for
like
about a
almost a
year.
year. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to
So
hear your thoughts about that program.
I'm into different semi-regular or regular get-togethers with you. The first one being LabVIEW Mastermind,
Hmm.
and the other one being the business of LabVIEW. I get different benefits out of both of the two different groups, I think. With the LabVIEW Mastermind group, it as a consultant, I work mostly by myself. I don't have other LabVIEW developers to cross-check my code, to do code walks. I have another LabVIEW consultant that I use as a subcontractor quite often. So on the projects that he and I are working together, great. I throw things to him. He throws things to me. But the LabVIEW Mastermind group is a great way of being able to meet with other people and just talk about what I've done, because we the group has both show and tell, but we also have, hey, I'm having this problem, have
Yep.
any of you run into it before? And it's a great way of getting, especially for those of us who are only operating in 1 or 2 person teams and don't have like a group of a dozen people that we work with to bounce ideas off of. A great way to get other feedback, other ways to approach things. There's some meetings I just sit there listening, because what you and some of the others are doing are just so far outside of what I do. I'm like, okay, this is interesting, but I don't see how I'll ever use it. And there's other times where I or you or certain people tend to dominate most of the questions for a particular topic, or over several topics sometimes, on a particular meeting, just because we've done that or seen that multiple times in our careers, where it's like, oh, have you tried this, have you tried this, have you tried this, because we've seen a half dozen variations over the years. So having my career started at on NI, I had 5 years at NI. Then I had 9 years with an NI alliance partner that no longer exists, and then I formed my own LabVIEW consultant slash alliance partner 13 years ago now. And there's a lot of difference when you're working on small 1 and 2 person projects versus, and you might be working on a small 1 or 2 person project in a team, when you're in a team of 12, 20 people, 10, 20 people, and you still have people that maybe aren't working on the project that you can still go and talk to,
Hmm.
versus when you are a 1 or 2 person shop, that you have fewer avenues of having the conversations versus just posting something on a forum. Hey, has anyone seen this? So I definitely find even though any one session I might want to sleep through because it just doesn't apply to me. I shouldn't say that because I never do want to sleep through them. It's just some of them are very relevant and some of them are not relevant to what I'm doing. And so overall, I think it's a great benefit for me, even though on any one individual meeting, I don't always have a takeaway, because that's one of the things we do in the meetings is we talk about our takeaways at the end of the meeting. And some of the meetings there are none for me, and the other meetings there's a half dozen for me. And I think that's true of a lot of people in the meeting, because we all have, we have some people who do actor framework. We have other people who are DQMH experts and are on the board and are developing some of the paid or unpaid toolkits for DQMH, like Enrique with the Panther dashboard. For a long time, honestly, I don't want to use anybody else's frameworks sort of guy. I'm doing a bunch with DQMH right now, but I've been doing this 2.5 decades, so my baseline over 2.5 decades, and my baseline experience starts before a lot of these toolkits and frameworks were introduced. But I've seen a number that were introduced that were very poorly written, that were not debuggable, that were not well documented, and if I start in and I'm immediately getting errors, I'm not going, and I have and I find that they're using a much different programming style. It makes it hard for me to want to stay with that toolkit, with that framework, when I have things that I know work for me that are a lot easier for me to debug.
Yeah. No, I mean,
there had been one project that I had spent a bunch of time debugging, got to the root cause of the problem of the it was a sample framework from National Instruments. If you remember, there had been a group for a while that was doing a lot of sample code, a lot of sample frameworks. I had spent hours debugging one issue, finally figured out what it was, and it was a very simple issue that just wasn't well documented of do this and you won't have, it was a mismatch in names in 2 locations, and it cost me half a day or more to debug. And I remembered it at the time, and then I was in that code like a year or 2 later and did the exact same thing and spent a couple of hours, and I'm like, oh crap, this was what it was. And there's just so many times I've been bitten by poor documentation, poor design choices, of people not designing for errors and error handling as part of the native initial design. That last year, or beginning of this year, is my first time really heavily working on some DQMH stuff.
Yeah, I feel like we could do better with error handling in general in LabVIEW. I mean, I feel like NI kind of sets the tone with things like error 7, where it tells you it can't find a file, but never tells you what file it's looking for. Sorry, I hate to blame NI for some of those things, but I mean, I think that's just emblematic of the problems that people have with error handling. It's like they don't have the empathy to think of who's going to see this error message and what are they going to do with it. And also sometimes we do that too. Like we expose like, oh, TCP/IP error XYZ or Visa error XYZ, and really what we should say is, hey, check the cable and make sure this thing's connected.
Yes, and I think good error messaging is very much part of it, but the other pet peeve that I have. And I love working with the gentleman that I use frequently as a subcontractor. Um, but he and I have very different approaches to error handling, which drives me crazy. And his is more akin to the NI approach, which is most of your loops stop on error. And well, the question is, do they need to stop? If I'm doing TCP communications, so if we look at the NISTM toolkit, because that's been around for quite a few years, a lot of people still heavily use it. If we look at the communications in the NISTM toolkit, you start off with their basic loop handling of I have an incoming connection. It didn't time out for my TCP listener. So if it times out, we hit the case structure and we re-loop and we listen again for the specified number of seconds. I want to say 10 is the default, because that way our code can stop if we've gotten a stop signal from elsewhere in the code. We're not hung up waiting on a connection for infinity. But then, assuming a connection is established, there's examples of here's how I decode a message. And the thing is if you're using a scan from string and the string was in a different format, you get error code 85. Well, in the example code, any error is going to cause you to drop the connection and stop the program. And so that's bad in two different ways. One being, well, if I'm just having problems parsing a message, maybe I don't want to drop my entire Ethernet connection because one message was bad. But it also is poor because, okay, I've dropped my connection. The sample programs never try and reestablish contact. And so if you want robust code, you can't. That's not how you get robust code, because it never tries to reestablish connection. I want to know that if I unintentionally broke the little tab off my Ethernet jack cable and it's a little loose and someone pushes the cable and so I've just temporarily lost it. If I push that cable back in, I want connections to reestablish if they can. Now there's always exceptions, but I think error handling as a whole is something that in many, many programs and many, many examples is poorly defined. Now, the other hand, you have to worry about over-engineering, because there's the let's keep it simple for an example, but there's also going from the examples to the real world frequently gets you in trouble, because the examples were good for showing what they needed to do for a particular subportion, but they don't get you into the real world where things are not run once, where things are running continuously, where you have to worry about if you're talking about a CRIO talking to a host program, for some reason, there's Windows updates, the host program rebooted. Is the mechanism designed such that the host computer can reconnect? Or if someone had, blue screened the computer and you have to reconnect. And I think this is true of a lot of example programs, NI and otherwise, of you very infrequently see people going to that level and talking about that in the frameworks and in the examples of getting to here's the basics versus here's the robust version that will handle the real world.
Yeah, I definitely remember the first couple of projects I did. I definitely had those problems that I would just oh, well, if there's an error, we'll just close the communication, whatever, restart everything, fine. And yeah, that doesn't really work so well in the real world. And
Not
yeah,
yeah.
we had a guy who would walk around and do testing. He would just basically pull out the Ethernet cable, pull out the USB cable, plug it back in, and see what happened. and
Yeah,
it's a good
I,
test.
I I had a couple of customer situations, and I try and design for self recovery where possible. So, like if I have an NI USB DAC device, like the USB 6008, for example, some of my testing is if I unplug it and plug it back in, does it recover? And my code was designed that if someone accidentally pulled out the data acquisition device, the code will stop logging because, hey, I don't have any real data. It will put certain portions of itself into safe states. But if and when you plug that back in, it was supposed to recover. Because like the other another thing I saw years ago was, and actually this is a to the best of my knowledge, this is a problem to today, that on PXI chassis, and I haven't tested the last couple of the last year or two, but on like a PXI chassis, if running either the was this had been a Linux-based Linux-based PXI chassis, your LabVIEW real-time program would actually start executing prior to the NI DAC driver finishing its own initialization. And so if you start trying to address the cards that are in the system, you get errors saying this isn't initialized or this isn't in the system. And so you're if you haven't designed error handling in, you're hosed. And it's just because the LabVIEW real time executable that you created is already running before the NI-DAC drivers have finished initializing. And so this was back the one that where I first saw this was back in like 2014 2015 timeframe, 2013 as well. I have tested at least a couple of years ago. And so we had all of these workarounds. We had to put in all these different workarounds to say, how do I know when the driver has finished initializing so that I can access these cards? But like with the USB DAC devices, I would see the same thing where if I have a program set to run on startup, sometimes my LabVIEW program is running before Windows has finished. In this case, Windows has finished initializing the DAC drivers, the DAC MX drivers. And so if my code is set to say, oh, hey, we're running this error, let's try and close and reopen my DAC device, it can recover from that situation on its own. You don't have to, and because I've got the background on, you can't really see this, but I have a monitor where my hand is waving right here. That's it's a touchscreen computer, an industrial touchscreen computer. It's 2 inches thick, got a monitor, it's the entire computer, it's an all-in-one type device. And it's set to boot into Windows, set to not require a login, and set to launch the executable. But the executable is always stuck waiting on the DAC driver to finish initializing before it can detect and start running. And so in doing that, I also found the way I was doing it ended up reporting a reproducible memory leak to NI. Because my self-recovery code was trying to close an invalid DAC handle, and oops, it causes a memory leak if you close an invalid handle.
Huh, that's funny.
I want to say that got fixed in LabVIEW 2019 F1 or the corresponding DAC MX release that corresponded with LabVIEW 2019 or 2019 Service Pack 1 being released because of the different nomenclature back then. Sorry. Yeah. So, but yeah, proper error handling is definitely a pet peeve of mine.
I'm a big fan of including error handling and logging, just general logging, very early on in a project. That's like one of the first things I try to set up. Just because that makes everything else easier. Because if you add a new component, all of a sudden you're getting an error. If you don't have your error handling up and running yet, then you're gonna miss that.
error handling, and I've got my own internal error handling reuse library that I've had. That one I've had for about 2 decades now, in one form or another. That is usually one of the first three things I'm tending to include on a project. Because if nothing else, that's going to log all the errors to disk so that I can figure out where I've started creating failures in my code first thing.
Yeah, it's kind of inevitable that that happens at some point along the way. So I have a question. You mentioned you've got your data librarian and you're not really doing waveforms. You're kind of doing more like single point IO stuff. There was a
Yes.
discussion on the LabVIEW Discord about PLCs and CRIOs and whether you would use one over the other. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I know PLCs exist. I helped support back in 1999 and 2000. So, we're going back a long time. I helped support what NI used to call their industrial automation product line, Lookout and Bridgeview. Bridgeview eventually became what was known as the LabVIEW Data Logging Supervisory Control Module. And so this was a small group of application engineers that had to help communicate with a lot of different PLCs. So I learned a little bit about PLCs at the time, but only in terms of the communications, not the, hey, let's program them using ladder logic or any of the other technologies for programming them, the structured text and some of the other things. And so my viewpoint on that is a little bit skewed because I've only ever had the real experience with the NI Compact Rio and the NI Field Point and Compact Field Point real-time controllers versus having hands-on experience with PLCs. But my personal understanding is generally the NIC Rios are a lot more flexible because we can program anything we want into them. PLCs tend to be a little bit more structured or limited in that regards, although today's PLCs do allow a lot more programming than they did back when like the Compact Rio and Compact Field Point lines first released. Um, and an understanding I still have is that PLCs tend to be very similar to what a lot of my projects do in that we're looking at the scalar data points. We're doing a lot, even on the ones that do like image processing, you're really looking at scalar data. You're not looking at doing a lot of Fourier transforms. You're not looking at doing a lot of custom data algorithms that you can do in the compact Rios. Likewise, my understanding, which again may be wrong, so if you're in the industry, please don't come after me for saying this, is another place like the Compact Rios Excel is with the FPGA fabric, our ability to create custom language interface modules, or not language, but custom bus interface modules for a lot of different buses. The serial line, the FPGA has a lot more flexibility in that regards than a PLC is going to have.
Okay, so basically more flexibility, more processing power, ability to do
Yeah,
different
and
algorithms.
different algorithms, but also with the CRIO, you can do the waveform acquisitions. You can log waveforms to disk and do any sort of analysis you want on them. And my understanding is that functionality is a lot more limited on PLCs.
Yeah, the other thing I had heard something to do with like safety critical stuff. There's like some special ratings that PLCs can get. Does that ring a
Yes,
bell? Okay.
yeah, there's a number of safety critical specs that PLCs can do. PLCs are better in terms of redundant power supplies, redundant Ethernet. Some of that you can do on Cerio, some of that you can't. There's also, and I had released, I don't know if, I remember them releasing it. They started releasing a couple of compact Rio modules for, I'm forgetting the proper terminology, but they released a couple of compact Rio modules and a couple and a software development toolkit for not intrinsic safety, but I want to say it's called functional safety. It's been a couple years since I looked at it. And with those sort of modules, you're looking at, are they still maintaining operation when if like this with the C-RIO, you can do things that will crash the controller. And the nice thing, even with traditional C-RIO, is you could have your FPGA code running even when the real-time processor is rebooting itself. But with the functional safety, assuming I'm remembering the term correctly, you're looking at that at the I/O module level rather than at the FPGA or C-RIO level. But there's also the need for having safety interlocks, for having redundancy, and doing if you have three inputs, you want to make sure that at least two of the three inputs match. And there's there's safety modules, safety relays that are just designed on a different set of behaviors than you traditionally see in most of the C-RIO modules.
Yeah, when I used to do stuff for the nuclear industry, it used to be they needed 4 sensors for everything. Because
Okay.
the logic for anybody who is unfamiliar, if you've got one sensor and the sensor goes bad, you have no idea. You're just reading whatever the sensor says. And the only way you
Yeah.
have any indication it goes bad is if it's like way out of line. So if you're reading temperature and it's suddenly like negative 1,000 degrees Kelvin, well, okay, yeah, obviously there's something wrong. But if it's like 10 degrees off, you don't know. So then
You don't.
you put 2 sensors. You say as long as they agree, everything's good. But then when they don't agree, which one's correct?
Which one? Yeah, which one is correct? And then, yeah, and
So then
so
you get to 2 out of 3, and then you can at least say, okay, well, if one goes bad, well, which 2 agree and go with that. But then the nuclear industry, they added a fourth one, so you can have one fail completely and still have 3-point redundancy.
yeah,
So, yeah, it's great. It would have been nice if Boeing did something like that for their MCAS system and their little sensors, because that was part of the problem that they had there.
yep,
In that
It
case,
was
actually, if I
sensor
recall correctly,
disagreement.
well, actually, if I recall correctly, they actually had 2 sensors and they only decided to use one, so they didn't even take advantage of the fact that they had two. So, yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, they do have real world consequences. I mean, it's all like risk tolerance and what are you actually doing and what are the consequences. But nuclear power plants, there could be some big consequences. So probably a good idea that they
oh
do
yes.
quadruple redundancy.
I've done some projects at nuclear power plants over the years.
Yeah, the thing.
One of the interesting things on that project was they require all code to be printed out. So we had binders and the 3-ring binders and binders and binders of just printed out LabVIEW front panels and block diagrams because that was part of the regulatory requirements.
I've heard of that before. Yeah, I don't remember us doing that. I do remember when I worked at Westinghouse that there was thing, things could either be safety critical or non-safety. And the safety critical stuff, like I had to deal with like dropping the rods in the reactor and stopping the reaction. And that was like super heavily regulated, lots of rules and red tape. Probably rightfully so, but the problem was as soon as they declared something non-safety, they're like, "Great, woohoo! We have no rules. We do whatever we want." And so then they had like no process, which was kind of it was two weird extremes. So yeah, very interesting. I do have a couple more questions. You
Okay.
mentioned you've been getting into doing some training lately, or more training. I guess you used to do some
Yeah.
as a CPI.
Yeah. I am a National Instruments CPI, a certified professional instructor. I taught my first LabVIEW. It was called LabVIEW Basics 1 back then. I taught that in '99, so I have been teaching for quite a few years. A lot of the LabVIEW training sort of went away during COVID. And so haven't been doing as much training because it's, 4 years later, it's still ramping back up. One thing that NI has done over the last year is they're starting to bring back the new term is authorized training centers. And so there's various training centers at different places around the U.S. that they're bringing back, and so I'm helping Test Force try and get their Dallas facility up and running to teach LabVIEW courses again, or not again, but for the first time for them. They don't have any CPIs on staff, and then I know Alan Smith has been talking to them about doing some of the like LabVIEW Actor Framework courses there. He likes teaching the more advanced courses. I love bringing the newcomers into LabVIEW.
Yeah, I'm much more. I like the advanced class. I mean, I like the enthusiasm in the beginner classes sometimes when the people who are there are really enthusiastic. They're not always enthusiastic to be there, but when they are, it's good. But yeah, I like teaching the more advanced stuff for whatever reason. I feel like I don't know. I feel like the beginner one. It's hard to remember exactly what it's like to be a beginner and not know anything. And sometimes yeah, it's just a different mindset. I think teaching
Yeah.
complete beginners.
So one of my hobbies is scuba diving, and I'm a certified dive master. As a dive master, I am a professional diver in the sports diving industry. And as a dive master, I'm able to assist with classes. I can't teach, but I can assist. And so, what one thing for me about being a dive master in the basic open water classes is it was an instructor has to worry about safety. They have to worry about the students completing the skills. As a dive master, I worry about safety first thing, but I also worry about helping the student have a good time. It's not just about I'm going to complete the skills and prove I know what I'm doing and I'm not going to kill myself. It's how do I make them enjoy it? Because what you see it is there's a lot of people that will take their scuba certification class and never dive again. And so oh, raising your hand. Yeah. Um, and so I like the introduction level because I can ideally be the difference between them getting the basic level of knowledge for them to be somewhat successful versus them getting the basic knowledge, but also getting the enthusiasm and having a better time so that they want to continue, whether it's LabVIEW or whether it's scuba diving.
Yeah, last year I got a rock climbing certification, my AMGA single pitch instructor, and I could teach some basic rock climbing stuff. And that was definitely part of what they graded you on was making sure that people had a good time so that they come back out. I think from a rock climbing point of view, the reason I don't like teaching the complete beginners is because I feel like there are too many ways they can kill themselves. And like I feel like if I'm teaching like intermediate people, they know at least the basics. I don't have to watch them as much. So I think that's part of it because when you're constantly worried about them killing themselves, it feels too much like babysitting to me.
I can definitely understand that point of view, but like I want to say this was probably back in '07 or somewhere between '07 and '09, and a family of four was doing the scuba certification class. It was an older couple, their two adult sons, and the woman was just having a horrendous amount of difficulty with mask flood and clear. And admittedly, that is one of the skills that most people have problems with. It is I would say it's possibly the most common skill for people to have problem with. And there were two instructors in the class. There was me, and she just could not do it, but she really wanted to do it. As a dive master, I can't teach, but I can work on a skill once it has been taught. And so the instructors said we can't keep give it to they said to her we can't keep giving you more time because we have to finish the rest of the class for everybody else, but Erin's going to sit here working with you. And I sat there working with her, and I sat there working with her. And the next night, I sat there working with her. And she was so far behind that she was going to have to redo the class, but we got it that she was doing the skill reliably, that she understood what she was doing wrong, and she was comfortable performing the skill reliably and repeatedly. And she took so much joy out of being able to do that skill and being able to complete the class, even if there was going to be makeup sessions, that she
Hmm.
could do this with her family. And that was what I brought in that scenario. That is what I brought to the table by being there, was that ability to spend all that extra time being able to talk about, yeah, that was my own worst skill when I got certified back in '89. Yes, I've been diving for a very long time. Um, and so, that's what I hope someone coming out of my classes get, is that it's not only the enjoyment, it's not only it's understanding here's where I'm starting from in LabVIEW or in SCUBA, but getting the enjoyment out of being competent and being able to complete the tasks.
Yeah, no, that's a good reason to like teaching. Yeah, I always liked all the rock climbing and other things that I've taught, and even LabVIEW. I always like living vicariously through my students because I would teach people how to rock climb, and we just teach them the basics. And then like 2 or 3 years later, they go climb like El Cap or something, and I'm like, wow, okay, cool. Like, I had some small part of that, and they're doing stuff that
Yeah,
like I've only ever dreamed about doing. So that's kind of cool.
yeah.
There
Well,
definitely is some of that.
I will also say, if any of the podcast listeners are in the Austin, Texas area and are scuba certified as rescue divers or higher, I am looking for volunteers. There is a local theater chain called Alamo Drafthouse, and they have themed movie events. One of their themed movie events is called Jaws on the Water. They show the movie Jaws while you're floating on inner tubes in Lake Travis. And we put scuba divers in the water as fake sharks to scare the hell out of people during the movie. And I'm the lead shark and have done that for quite a few years. I first did that in 2009. Um, but so if there's anyone who's rescue certified or higher that doesn't mind diving in the dark to have fun scaring people, I do need more volunteers.
It sounds like fun. So, you mentioned that you have a degree in ocean engineering. Did the scuba diving come out of that, or which one came
The,
first?
the scuba diving came first and influenced my choice of studying ocean engineering and electrical engineering in school. So I double majored with ocean engineering and electrical engineering, um, because my school didn't offer minors. So my choice was do one, the other, or do them both. For whatever reason, I chose do them both and got uh, got a hell of a lot of credit hours before managing to get out the door. I graduated with the equivalent of 7 years worth of credit hours. Um, and so the scuba diving came first and is one of the reasons I chose ocean engineering. But job market took me the job offer I liked the most was the one from NI. And that started a 27-year career in LabVIEW.
Cool. So, I always like to ask a question, and that is to tell me about an experiment that you tried that didn't work, and what did you learn from it?
So back when I was in college, I had gotten an internship at Disney World. I was a scientific dive intern at the Living Seas Pavilion at Epcot Center. It's now known as the Seas and Friends. And one of the I don't know if I'd call it an attraction, but one of the tools we had there was a remote operated vehicle. It was a Phantom 300 XL ROV from, I want to say it was made by Deep Oceaneering, or Deep Ocean Engineering. And every so often it would be out of service due to problems with the cabling. some of the cable connectors were a little fragile. And so the technician would spend time trying to find out where is the break in the cable. And in one of my RF classes, I had just learned about time domain reflectometry. Um, and so I'm like, oh, we can use that to identify where the break in the cable is. Um, because it was usually at the connector, but not always. And so I arranged to borrow equipment, did all these measurements looking for to identify where the break in the cable was, and couldn't succeed. And I'm like, what's going on here? And I finally sat down and did the calculations afterwards and realized that based on the equipment I had been able to borrow, the pulse that I was sending down the length of cable to identify the break, the pulse was actually longer than the cable was. And so I was so thrilled of, hey, here's this way we can actually you know identify where the break is, and the equipment I was capable of borrowing was not capable of doing the actual measurement with the accuracy I needed, because the pulse generator I had was just way too slow relative to the length of the cable.
So
So it was a fun little experiment, and it was a good learning experience.
so for those who don't know, time domain reflectometry, correct me if I'm wrong, but you send a wave down a cable, and if it hits a discontinuity, it reflects back or something? Is that the...
Yes.
Okay.
And so if it sees a discontinuity, it will come back a lot sooner than you expect. And likewise, but it's also it will bounce back at the end of the cable regardless, ideally.
Hmm.
So you should always be seeing the return pulse. But if there's partial breaks, like if you're in a fiber optic cable and you have a weakness in the cable, or you will see more than the expected return pulse. Either your pulses, you get a full pulse back too quickly, or you may be seeing multiple pulses due to multiple one or more deformations or problems in the cable.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I remember at Westinghouse they used that for something. I don't remember what it was, but I do remember seeing it there. So my understanding is they do that a lot for like underground cables and stuff. Is
Yes,
that
so
yeah.
you can identify where the breaks are before you start digging everything up.
Yeah, yeah. And probably underwater cables as well, although
Yes.
yeah, cool. All right. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Well, I hit a milestone this morning. My foster puppies opened their eyes for the first time today.
Very good. I was going to be surprised if we didn't hit on that topic at least once.
Well, I've only got 9 dogs in the house right now, so I'm actually low.
Ah,
It's normally 12 to 16, because I'm in rescue and always have a new litter. My wife and I specialize in taking in the dumped pregnant mamas, and helping them have their puppies. These puppies arrived as a surprise. We knew Mama was pregnant, but she wasn't showing any of the typical signs of, oh, hey, I'm going to be giving you puppies in the next couple hours. And I just was sitting there reading, and all of a sudden I heard the puppy crying.
oh, that's
But
interesting.
she
Wasn't
had three little
surprised.
boys, and they opened their eyes today. So they're right, or two of the three of them have their eyes open now.
Okay, cool. I don't know much about puppies. Do they normally get born with their eyes closed and then they slowly open? Is that it?
Yes, puppies and kittens, for that matter, are born with their eyes and ears closed. And I don't know what the timing is on kittens, but for puppies, you normally see eyes opening around the 10 to 14 day age range,
Oh,
although
okay.
sometimes it can be as much as 3 weeks.
Okay, cool.
And then for the first week, the eyes are pretty cloudy. They're really only seeing light and dark, and and shadow. But over the next couple days, you'll start seeing more and more of their irises and the other form structures in the eyes.
Cool. Yeah, things you learn. All right. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. It's been a great conversation.
You're welcome.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.